thanks to the organizer. Thank you all. It's really a pleasure to be here to speak at this conference. And also, it's been a pleasure to follow the evolution of the Limbo project in the previous months, really. So my talk will be about African writers on African immigrants in Italy today. And as a title, I've chosen alternative or alternative stories, because I think consistently with your title, Stories Untold, it's important to focus on this thing. So the capacity of telling stories and the importance of using stories of immigrants in Italy and abroad to develop our sensitivity to these issues and to create sites for cross-cultural encounters, let us say. So, first of all, okay, I want to start by, noticing that this is a very interesting conference because it doesn't come out from an Italian studies program strictly, but from a communication department. And that is a signal of the extent to which the issue of migration in Italy today is not only a local issue, it's really a global issue. And that also is reflected in literature. I just want to start by showing you that there is this very interesting series published by Indiana University Press in the United States, and African Global Voices. They translate novels, memoirs, literature books from non-English speaking authors from African countries, from Africa and from the African diaspora. And three novels written by African migrants in Italian have been published so far in this series. So not for an audience of Italianists, but for a global audience interested in African global voices. So even if all the three stories are sort of local, as I will show you later, they have potentially an appeal to a worldwide audience. So just to give you a first instance of the global importance of the issue at stake with the migration in Italy and migration literature more specifically. Now, when I'm talking about migration literature, I'm talking about writings by authors who came to Italy and chose Italian as their language of expression, of communication. So, Italian people is their intended primary audience. A dialogue that's both local, it takes place in Italy, because if you write in Italian, you are addressing a local public, not people outside Italy. But also a global dialogue, because these writers come from other countries, and some of them are really moving. So Italy is also a kind of transition country for some of these writers. So interestingly, their trajectories often, have an end in Italy, but other times these trajectories just continue into other countries. And the dialogue with Italians is part of their global, transnational journey. So stories. The importance of literature is the importance of telling untold stories. Untold stories because the role of migration literature in Italy has mainly been to bring to an Italian audience attention issues, events, contexts, and subjects not covered by Italian media and consequently not very familiar to Italian people, in an average sense, of course. Second point, storytelling as a cross-cultural process. As I will show you later on, this literature has a very storytelling posture. So it starts from this idea, the man or the woman coming from another country with something to say to the locals. And that's a very important strategy used to create a cross-cultural encounter geared to social and cultural change. Last but not least, migration literature in Italy is an instance of the migrants' social and cultural agency. So very often in the media, even in the most benevolent accounts of migration, we have the representation of migrants as passive subjects. So they are forced by some reasons, a wide range of reasons, to leave their own country, to go to Italy, to start a new life in very difficult conditions. We have economic exploitation, bureaucratic difficulties, and so on and so forth. But their active role is generally neglected by the media. And through literature, writers really claim back the agency of the migrant. First, by the very fact of being a literary author, so something with a cultural prestige, of course, but also because they've told stories about the agency of migrants. It's not only the stereotype of the poor migrant suffering tremendous situations and so on and so forth. So, now, briefly, an historical context, the beginnings. So, to place this in a wider frame, I have to say that the 1980s are the period when we have the first great increase in the flow of migrants to Italy, and especially from Africa. The composition of migration will change later on, especially with the new configuration of the European Union. But at that time, late 80s, early 90s, migration is mostly from African countries, Central and Northern African countries. And the literature of migration in Italy at the beginning was basically an African thing with African authors writing. There was a triggering event that raised the media and the publishers' attention and made them sensitive to migration stories. That was in 1989 when Jerry Maslow, a South African refugee working as a farm laborer in Villa di Terno, Caserta province, not far from Naples, he was killed by a racist gang. The event had a strong impact on media, and the following year, in the wake of the event and of the emergence of the issue of migration in Italy, journalists and publishers encouraged the writing of immigrants' memoirs with the collaboration of Italian co-writers. So basically we had journalists or co-authors joining an African migrant with a non-perfect proficiency in Italian, helping him or her writing a memoir about the journey to Italy and his or her first years in Italy. A few facts before moving to some texts. My source is this very interesting database with all the texts published by migrants in Italy. The database at the University La Sapienza in Rome was stopped 3 years ago. It will be back online shortly, but if you look up Basile on the internet, you won't find anything right now. So you have to wait a bit. But up to 2013, which is the year when the database stopped its activity, we had 150 African authors in Italy. That's a pretty impressive number. Italy is a very small country. So to have 150 authors of African origin, 30% of the total number of migrant writers in Italy, it's pretty impressive. They published 450 texts so far. In that figure, you have both short stories, poems, full volumes, everything. 28% of the overall, sorry for the typo, corpus of migration literature in Italy. At the beginning, the most common genre was memoir. Of course, everybody expects people to talk in autobiographical terms, but later on, more fictional, more creative genre really took over, like novels, poetry, theater. African countries represented, the most represented, are Morocco, Senegal, Cameroon, Nigeria, Somalia, Algeria, Cabo Verde, Eritrea, and Tunisia. But if you see the total list, you will see that there are authors from almost any African country in Italy. So really a great variety. Differently from other European countries, there is not, a kind of a set of privileged or countries with closer relationships. Like, if you go to France, of course, you have a prevalence of Algerians and Tunisians. That's not the case in Italy. So let's move to the authors. Outsiders from Africa. That's how they were envisioned at the beginning. And Popokuma from Senegal was really the founding figure of this literature. He came to Italy as a street vendor from Dakar, Senegal. He moved first to Paris, and then, very disappointed with the condition of Senegalese immigrants in France, he moved to Italy. In Italy, he worked a lot as a street vendor and learned Italian on his own with a pocket grammar and the Italian that he could learn on the street. And together with an Italian journalist, he wrote I Was an Elephant Salesman, Adventures Between Paris, Dakar, and Milan, published in 1989 and translated in English quite recently, 2010. And Elephant Salesman, if you maybe you know all the trinkets, trifle and trinkets sold by street vendors, and wooden elephants are a common object. Of course, here elephants also has a kind of African flavor, reminds readers of the native culture of Popokuma and also of the stereotypes about African culture. And I want to read you the first lines of this memoir. I come from Senegal. I used to be a salesman. Let me tell you everything I have been through. It's a hard job selling only for the toughest souls in this world. You can't be the type to give up easily. You have to use your legs and be insistent, even if they slam every door in your face. It may seem quite, obvious statement, but at that time in Italy, to have a migrant, saying these things directly to an Italian audience was pretty a significant thing that highlighted the migrant not as either the passive subject or the potential criminal, as media and politicians assumed, but a subject that is qualified by his capacity for hard work, resilience, wit, and for his deep experience. So the man coming from another country with a lot of experience to share with the people in the host country. So the migrant as a storyteller. And of course, that's a very heartfelt memoir because everything is in first person. It's also a strategy to make connections, to make bonds with the Italian readers. So now Popokuma is no longer a street vendor. He's a journalist and a librarian, but he's very active in politics. He was also a candidate, I think, at the last national or regional elections. So writing for him was really a means of social change, not literature for literature's sake, really a social practice. With writers like Popokuma, we had a new view on Italian society. So transnational routes, journey to and from Italy, urban and rural spaces inhabited by immigrants, seen from a different perspective, not from the point of view of the Italians. He talked, and other writers talked a lot about law and migration. So bureaucracy, police, documents, that's really, it's like an adventure novel if you read all their issues with bureaucracy and police. The dismantling of the stereotype Italians, good-natured people, Italiani brava gente. Are Italians brava gente or racists? Migrant writings are a mirror in which Italians can see a different and contradictory image of themselves. And also through many novels and memoirs, we see clearly immigrant labor as part and parcel of local and global economy, right from the early 90s. So very in advance if compared to recent media reports by journalists on immigrant labor. So really, immigrant as writers were ahead of their times. But after that, we shifted from documentary-like memoirs to imaginative works, exploring a range of themes, bridging migrants' lives in Italy and Africa. This dual focus is always present in African writers in Italy. To list a few themes: nostalgia and the dream of return, social injustice in Italy as well as abroad, the value of native cultures and the need to share their legacy with Italians, something that's still an issue in Italy, of course, language and acculturation problems in Italy, so the difficulty of being integrated in Italian society, the difficulty of learning Italian, of course. The language is a major issue, and still today in schools there is not enough support for immigrants trying to learn Italian. And the work on stereotypes. Very quickly, I will show you some example, and I have privileged works that have been translated into English. So these are retrievable here in the US. So Neila, a novel by this Togolese writer, Popokuma Ebri, now a physician in near Milan. This is a novel about being no longer an insider in your own country. So it's an account of a trip back to an unprecise African country where the immigrant can no longer recognize his own country, cannot feel himself at ease with his native culture, and also a novel about the exploitation of a local woman as a metaphor for the exploitation of a continent. So we have two layers. One is, international exploitation. One is the personal, subjective state of the migrant no longer at ease in his native country. Popokuma Ebri, sorry for the typo in the name, also is a very great example of the use of irony to fight stereotypes. One of his books is called Imbarazzismi. In English, you could translate that in embarrassisms. Quite interesting. Now I'm not going to read the quote because I'm running short of time, but in a few anthologies in English we have these very short stories about basically misunderstandings. So the thing is that we have in these short stories we always have African that are seen by Italian as locked prisoners of a stereotype. So the African must be necessarily poor or potentially criminal or incapable of speaking Italian, and so on and so forth. To move very quickly, we have post-colonial narratives from Somalia. In this case, the first book published in 1994. Italy had a colonial empire, not for as much time as other European empires, but nonetheless pretty influential in the countries that have been conquered. Shirin Ramaznali Fazel, far from Mogadishu, wrote about nostalgia, daily life, gender, historical and individual memories of Somali women in Italy. Then another writer, more recently, Gabriella Germandi, translated in English last year, explored the unacknowledged memory of Italian colonialism and its aftermath. And she tried to write an alternative history and also drawing on alternative way of transmission. So not only written history, but also oral history. Cristina Di Fara is another very interesting writer if you're interested in refugees. Basically Somali refugees, the trauma of war, escaping from the Somalia civil war, and also with an interesting perspective on gender, motherhood, and care. Penultimate slide, Black Italians. So these are unfortunately in Italian, not translated in English, but we have a lot of writing about second generation Africans. So people born in Italy of African parents are claiming their status as Italian. Not, of course, not assimilating 100% into the Italian cultural standard, but claiming their double identity. And two foremost examples of this writings are Ijaba Shego, Home is Where I Am Now, and the journalistic investigation by Popokuma, We Black Italians, No Italiani Neri. Popokuma is not a second generation migrant, but wrote on second generation migrants for this particular book. So I will skip this on the storyteller and moving toward my end. African writers on African immigrants. They speak about what Italian media, politicians, and history books usually neglect. I've just mentioned economic exploitation, social marginalization, and historical memories. They question identities, Italian identity as well as the migrants' identity. They explore the many facets of migration, and they create the possibility of a dialogue based on the exchange of experience and traditions. And their overall posture of their literature is a desire to look towards the future. And to conclude with this future-looking posture, I want to read the final lines from Popokuma, I Was an Elephant Salesman, which gives you the sense that in 1989, it was already clear that these Africans in Italy wouldn't be, temporary guests, but a long-standing presence bound to settle down in Italy. So at the end of his memoir, he writes, "This is the life of a Senegalese, the life that I've known for a while now, and that seems to go on forever. But I'm also lucky because, as they say in my country, if you can tell the story of what you have been through, then it means it has brought you luck. Many of the guys rip up their permessi di soggiorno and return to Senegal because they want nothing more to do with Italy, the police, the carabinieri, the selling, the elephants, the ivory eagles, the necklaces, the Lacoste and Vuitton bags, the hotel rooms, the deportation papers, the confiscated merchandise, and the cold. The cold here is something I will never get used to. Many stay, they work, they sell, they become manual laborers and factory workers, even if they are exploited more than others. Many stay and meet Italian girls. They fall in love. There are weddings and separations and divorces and still more marriages. Babies are born." And I think this final note, babies are born, is fundamental to show you that migrants to Italy had clear in mind this issue far in advance than Italian people. And now with colloquiums like this and with the widespreading of this literature throughout English translation, this concern for a cross-cultural future can be really shared. Thank you.